Hello, listeners. As you are probably aware, my book, Podcasting for Business: How to Create a Show That Makes a Bottom Line Difference for Your Company, is going to be officially released on September 10th. So, to give everyone a deep dive into exactly what the book contains and how it can be used to improve your podcasting investment, I got together with Tom Fox of the Compliance Podcast Network to record a 10-episode mini-series on exactly that. It's all releasing on the Compliance Podcast Network. You'll find a link in the show notes. And I'm also going to be releasing one episode here on the company show every day until launch. I know you'll enjoy it. And if you want to get a copy of the book, you can do so at podcastingforbusiness.com/book.
This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to an exciting new podcast entitled Podcasting for Business, the Book. In this podcast, we will explore the powerful intersection of podcasting and business growth. In this exploration, I'm joined by one of the business podcast industry's top experts, Megan Dougherty, to discuss her game-changing book, Podcasting for Business. Whether you're a podcasting pro or just starting out, this podcast and Megan's book will be your go-to resource for turning your passion for podcasting into a powerful business tool. In this series, we'll take a look at the reason Megan wrote this book, the role of a podcast for business, and why your podcast blueprint acts as your prime directive. We look at the value math of podcasts and take a deep dive into the 15 metrics Megan suggests you consider using. We look at combining blueprints and metrics moving forward for your podcast. We say some words on recording and post-production, sound and audio quality, and then putting it all together. But don't take my word for it. Listen to Megan Dougherty on why you should listen to this podcast, and more importantly, buy her book, Podcasting for Business. Megan, give me 3 reasons why a listener should buy and read this book.
Because number 1, there actually is a formula for profitable podcasting. 2, it's all in the book, Podcasting for Business. And 3, any business can take this information and apply it and start seeing a better return on their podcasting investment.
In this episode, we take a detour into the recording and post-production process, how you can maximize those with top efficiency, yet bring labor-saving costs to your overall podcast production operations. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Megan Dougherty for another episode of Podcasting for Business, the book podcast. Welcome back, Megan.
Thank you, Tom. So happy to be here.
Megan, we started with a few more technical issues at the end of our last episode. Today, I thought we might spend some time talking about some things that some people may say are more technical, but I know you and I both have lots of thoughts on them, and it's generally around recording and post-production. We talked about some podcast formats and sound quality, but maybe we could start with guests. I've always been very straightforward with guests. I email someone and says, my name is Tom Fox. I have this podcast. I want you to come on and talk about you. And I've had nearly 100% success rate with that approach. But is there something more sophisticated, more strategic? We've talked obviously about the blueprints, but do different guests fit into different types of blueprints?
Very much. So we'll start with thought leadership. This is one of the more popular business podcast blueprints. And people often want to have guests on a thought leadership podcast because sitting alone in front of a mic in front of your computer and recording is stressful, and solo episodes are a little more challenging than guest episodes in some ways. And so the instinct is to get some guests that you can talk about your area of expertise. And as we mentioned briefly, I think in the last episode, you want to make sure that when you have guests on a thought leadership podcast, you're at least talking equally, like talking an equal amount of time to someone who is kind of at your professional level or maybe a couple of clicks above. And the reason for this is that you want to give your guest, in this case, a great experience, of course, but you also want to make sure that you're able to really contribute to the conversation and show off and demonstrate your own expertise and value as well. Contrast that with a relationship building podcast where you are approaching kind of guest hunting a little bit more strategically. And there are people who could be potential referral partners, maybe who work in the same industry, serve complementary audiences, or people who could eventually become clients themselves, or even from your existing pool of clients for audience engagement. And so approaching your guest strategy with a strategic mind means you might make different choices than you would if you were just racing to try and get people on your podcast because release is next week and you have no episode, which is a situation you will probably fall into at least once. We all have. But trying to be prepared a little more in advance, sending out those invitations. As you point out, most people are delighted to be invited to a podcast, and it's never wrong or rude or presumptive to invite someone to yours, even if it's a very small show and even if it's brand new. It's still nice to be asked.
So how do you, I'm really intrigued with this because the suggestion that you can go beyond thought leadership and maybe even more than one styles with one guest. So you can build a relationship, obviously, with the guest. You can have thought leadership if the guest truly is a thought leader. And frankly, every guest is a thought leader on themselves at the very minimum. But you can also build audience engagement because what I have found is your audience appreciates having an intelligent guest who can speak as a thought leader on their topic, whether they're a CEO, whether they're a compliance officer in my case, or others. Can you really drive in a way that we haven't really seen in other topics we've taken up, multiple blueprints with sort of one strong guest?
First, I'm going to say is you should probably just be focusing on one main high-level blueprint for each podcast that you have, or for each kind of each branded show. And it's not that you can never diverge from that single blueprint and that single goal, but you want consistency from episode to episode. So you can optimize a little bit for both. Let's use the audience engagement example as a really good one. If you're interviewing well-known guests for a thought leadership style podcast and you're having great equal conversations with them, part of that can be sharing audience questions. You can use this to promote your episode and engage your audience before the episode ever airs, saying, hey, I'm talking to super famous guest. It's going to be really cool. What should I ask them? And start a whole conversation about what the audience, your listeners, would like to have contained within that episode. And that's usually going to be really gratifying for your guest as well, because it means they know they're talking to people who are interested. And that's a really good feeling. So you can, and this is kind of how if you focus on one blueprint and then make that your primary goal, you're going to get the benefits from all of the others over time. And you'll get that relationship building, you'll get that thought leadership, you'll get that audience engagement. And it's going to grow as long as you have the focus and you're sort of being intentional about what you're doing and who you're talking to and why.
So how about, let's actually move to a different topic because we both have, I think, some passion around show notes. And
Show notes?
I don't think podcasters, frankly, focus enough on show notes. So why don't you show me yours and then I'll show you mine.
So my biggest thing about show notes is they're some of the most important real estate that you have with your podcast. When somebody's listening to an episode, they could be doing anything. They could be cooking dinner, they could be working out, they could be driving. They're probably not sitting at a desk taking notes. But when someone's reading, they often have a lot more ability to click a link, to take an action, to download the book when they're in that process. So by having a good written version of your podcast, and I mean, for my show, the company show, we go so far as to do a full edited transcript into a long blog post, because I want the experience for someone who happens to be reading at that moment to be about the same as someone who is listening would get. Because ideally, if I want them to connect with me, to learn about our services, to maybe join our membership community, I don't care if they do that when they're listening or reading. It doesn't matter to me. So I'm going to make sure both opportunities are available for the people to take that next action when it is a good fit for them. And we haven't even started to get on SEO and discoverability, which show notes are really great for. But yeah, overall, I think for most podcasts, especially some of the really bigger ones, huge wasted opportunity in terms of the content that you're getting from each episode. What are your thoughts?
That's a nice start. Continue. What about your newsletter? You should have, I think, a newsletter. If you have one podcast for your business, you should have a newsletter once a week for that podcast. Now, as we've talked about multiple times in this series, I have multiple podcasts. So I have a daily newsletter. But the concept you articulated of real estate is the same. It is prime real estate. And any sponsorship you might have, any other products you might want to point people to, any problem you can solve with a giveaway behind a gate on your website, that is prime real estate for a newsletter. And I think if you don't have a newsletter, you're sorely missing. But I've actually come to think of real estate as things like cover art and things such as your Twitter, your LinkedIn, your Instagram.
all of those if you want to do a TikTok. But those are all real estate where you can put different messages or highlight different things. We both engage in or are big proponents rather of audiograms.
Mhm.
Well, you can cut out a 30 or 60-second clip on one specific topic you want to highlight, not simply to drive engagement of your overall podcast, but to highlight that specific point. And so if you start to think about everything you have or potentially could have as real estate, and you take the time to produce those, you can have 10, 15, 20 pieces of social media marketing content that can literally be evergreen. And you can use it to get your message across, whatever that might be.
Oh, absolutely abundantly true. And not only can you use the assets that you create, but you can give them to your guests if it's possible for them to share. Giving them multiple assets means they can do so multiple times and have fresh content for their own audiences. I had a guest on the company show thank me for sending, I think it was 3 graphics and 2 videograms, just so that he'd have a variety to use over the next couple of months. Amazing. And to bring it back around to the blueprints again, especially relationship building, this is where it bothers me the most. Because if you've got a relationship building podcast, are you really going to sleep on the opportunity to write about how great your guest is and give links to their offers and their websites and their properties? That's a huge missed opportunity if you're not using that real estate to build that relationship. So it all kind of comes around again to what's the purpose of your podcast? Every element of the podcast should be working towards that purpose, whatever it is.
So I have read the beta copy of your book, so I haven't seen the complete version. But is it possible for you to have a spreadsheet in there with the branding and then the metrics and all the use, or is that something someone on my team, not named Tom Fox, is going to have to create?
We have actually got book resources that's going to be available as of launch day. And it's a spreadsheet that kind of goes through our entire episode guide methodology. So everything about the episodes, about the guests, all of the different stats. There's going to be demos on how to do it in there. Hopefully I will be fulfilling your spreadsheet related dreams.
Do I get a hint that there may be a workbook coming for us?
There might be a workbook coming for us, and there will definitely be a workshop coming for us. If you haven't yet, on Tuesday, September 10th, to celebrate launch, I'm doing a 90-minute ROI clinic on how to improve the return on your podcasting investment, where we're going to be talking about a lot of this and using my very favorite spreadsheet of all time.
Megan, we've talked about branding on this podcast, or several episodes of this podcast, but I'd like to maybe ask you one thing that I learned, I think literally in the last year, and it was consistency in your branding, and both in sound quality, but also visual quality.
Mm-hmm.
And that means colors, that means font, that means if you have a design that you particularly are like. So could you say a few words about branding, but not branding as a promise delivered, but what are some of the components that you advocate a podcaster think about around branding?
Yeah, so there's a lot of elements that can be branded within a podcast. You've got, of course, the visual, which is your cover art, any social media templates, the way that your show notes look. It's also how you sound. It's the quality of your audio, which does reflect on your brand. So another argument for good audio there. And any music or sounds that you use. It can be, your podcast can be a unique thing within your business. It can have its own look and feel, but it should look like it meshes logically with the rest of your business. So for example, if you've got standard brand colors, ours are purple, white, a little bit of yellow for highlight. You'll see that color reflected in our podcast cover art so that it looks like it belongs to the company. And there are amazing experts you can hire who are much better at like the intricacies of brand design and messaging than we, the podcast experts, are. But you want to make sure that it looks cohesive and that it doesn't stand out as not belonging to your business or of a really different quality level than everything else that you produce. If you're well known for your wonderful training videos and your excellent courses and your super high quality materials, you can't cheap out on the production of your podcast because it's going to look like it doesn't belong to your business if it didn't get the same attention that everything else did. That's part of branding too.
Megan, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted any more information on podcasting for business, the book, or to perhaps pre-order it, where can they go?
They can go to podcastingforbusiness.com/book. All of the details are there, including how to register for the ROI clinic. I'd love to see you there.
Megan, I can't wait to continue this conversation.
Me neither.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Podcasting for Business, the book. I hope you will check out Megan's book. We've linked to the resource in the show notes. You can pre-order it now. I would encourage you to do so and also attend her virtual Podcasting for Business conference, which will be held in May. I hope you will join us for our next episode where we put it all together in explaining how to podcast for business, use of metrics, and going forward. I know you'll enjoy our next episode.